Chapter 76 to 82. The thought of an immortal Dumbledore had significantly changed his attitude on how easy it would be to take out the Dark Lord. The fact that the old goat had also disappeared with Barty Crouch Jr. also worried him. Before, Chad had just thought he could send waves of ninja elves at the powerful old coot until he was overwhelmed if he needed to kill him off. He supposed the plan was still viable, but now he needed the old man alive to track down his redundancy plans, something much harder to achieve. As much as Chad ragged on Dumbledore, he still respected the man's power and abilities, even if he did make some massive cock-ups. But that was the advantage of hindsight or looking at someone else's decisions after the fact, who knows what influenced their choices at the time. It is much easier for outsiders to pick and choose what they would do when they had all of the facts and seen the consequences of the decisions the person they disparaged made. Which was why being inserted into the Potterverse gave Chad such a considerable advantage. That's not to say Chad still didn't think Dumbledore was an arrogant fool, too used to getting his own way and becoming blind to his faults. Then again, he was probably affected by the ambient magic of Hogwarts in his youth, stunting his critical thinking. That the old man still retained the ability to make magical Britain dance to his whims bespoke his intellect. If Chad had not been inserted into his domain, Dumbledore would have had no problems completing whatever plan he had in the works. If Dumbledore didn't die in canon and had access to Phoenix Tears and Horcrux knowledge, did he plan to revive as a descendant of his to take up the mantle of Leader of the Light? Or worse, take over Harry Potter's body when Voldemort AK'd him and become the new wizarding hero? That thought honestly chilled Chad's enthusiasm to continue playing around. He needed to stop treating this like a game. Sure, he had probably made some stupid mistakes out of arrogance, negligence, or entertainment. Australia was one such example, but overall he had set up a strong foundation to support himself. R.O.B. had denied him wishes for a reason. Future knowledge was already a massive cheat. That, coupled with an outsider's perspective on will-based magic, made it easy to carve out a future that suited Chad's desires. If Tom Riddle could harness accidental magic by the age of 11 without assistance, an adult mind in a child's body without prejudices on its applications would have a massive head start. Not to mention all the other instances of accidental magic fulfilling children's desires. Occlumency had only amplified the control over Chad's wandless magic, and he thought it ridiculous when some of the fanfiction he read waited until age 11 out of some misguided belief that magic needed the body to mature or a wand to use. If Neville Longbottom could do wandless magic as a baby, Chad sure as hell was going to achieve it as an adult. Why was I ranting again? Oh right, Dumbledore might be smarter than the books made him out to be. I need to stop thinking all wizards are completely stupid just because J.K. Rowling continually portrayed them as such. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Chad thought to himself. He had a terrible habit of raging in the confines of his mind every time something annoyed or worried him. But enough about that. There is nothing I can do until he makes a move against me. Sending the elves to find him would probably only make the Dark Lord more neurotic and may prompt him to do something drastic. For now, I should concentrate on neutralizing Slytherin's basilisk. Boppy, take me to Godric's hollow prison, please. Yes, master. The dutiful elf replied before teleporting them to the base. The 20 muggles confined in the silenced holding cells would be vital to his plan to initiate contact with the basilisk. They would be used to figure out if the snake would be hostile or not. Chad just needed to test if the helmets he had designed would work as intended. Stunning the man in the cell closest to him, Chad then opened its door and levitated the incapacitated muggle to the room next door where his lab was set up. After strapping the test subject down on a table, a fully enclosed helmet covered in runes was then equipped. Runes had become one of Chad's newest interests after he needed a method to contain a magical teleporting bird made from fire. And although Voldemort's memories didn't include a mastery over the subject, Tom had still researched ancient runes quite thoroughly in his quest for immortality and power. With the Room of Requirements abilities stoking his enthusiasm in the subject, Tom had absorbed every bit of information on runes he could find. Unfortunately, when he figured out the limitations of runes and their inability to achieve his end goals, Riddle had given up on the subject. While ancient runes could be utilized to achieve marvelous creations to enhance the standards of living and technology of the magical world, it was a lot of hard work. There was also the problem that it was only capable of creating tools and artifacts that could mostly be reproduced by spells without years of study or effort. With these factors combined, there had been a lot less interest in ancient runes, and the advancements in the field diminished. Nowadays, it was seen as more of a hobby than a career, much like potions. It was also much easier to buy finished products in the store than create them yourself. Things like racing broomsticks had become a luxury for Quidditch, instead of a means for travel. Communication mirrors were rare because the effort involved in their creation made them expensive, much cheaper to send a message by owl or use a pinch of flu powder to visit in person. Just like magic, runes needed imagination and intent to drive their creation, but thanks to the introduction of wands, there had been a steady decline in those for the last 1,000 years. With everything they desired available at the wave of a wand, what need was there to improve? Runes took time, effort, and patience, something most wizards lacked, but they also weren't the ultimate solution to gaining strength through powerful artifacts. They merely allowed an object to obtain a more permanent application of a spell and a way of focusing on the desired effects of specific abilities, much like potions. It was also a way of letting less talented wizards and witches overcome their limitations. Voldemort could fly without a broom, but could others? A pensive could let someone review a memory, but an Acclemens or Legomens could do so easily without one. With the lack of imagination or drive infecting wizards and witches around the globe, there was simply no advancement in their magical technology. Making a racing broom go faster was seen as a massive breakthrough in technology, instead of creating a flying vehicle. Sirius and Mr. Weasley were pioneers ahead of their time in that regard. All in all, like potions, ancient runes were remarkably effective when used in specific instances. But the time, effort, and materials involved made them a specialized solution to a problem instead of the panacea to any difficulty. However, when used in conjuncture with spells, it opened up a world of possibilities. Since Chad could not rely on Muggle technology at Hogwarts to remotely view the Chamber of Secrets, he needed to utilize runes to accomplish the same result. When he had taken over Grimmauld Place, the entire house had been catalogued and then sanitized to keep Sirius happy. All dark artifacts or books had been moved to Godric's Hollow for safekeeping and to stop Sirius from doing something stupid like destroying them out of hand. The misguided fool had even complimented Chad for removing dangerous dark magic when he told Sirius the elves had destroyed them for safety. The two-way communication mirrors had intrigued Chad at the time, but he had no immediate use for them or a reason to recreate them. Much like the typical wizard mentality, it was easier for him to send a message by elf. Now, however, it would hopefully solve the issue of the basilisk's death gaze. Chad pulled out Voldemort's wand ready to apply incentive to answer questions about the helmet's functionality if the test muggle decided to be uncooperative. There was no point using his own and leaving evidence of casting an unforgivable. Re-enervating the man, he was understandably confused about his situation. "I can't see." "Wait, what's on my head?" the disoriented man shouted. "Calm down, you are helping me test some new technology." Chad coolly replied to the man's panic. "F***CKU, how dare you hold me against my will? I know my rights, and you can't do T. Aw." Preempting a drawn-out rant about how the muggle was free to march onto Chad's land to commit crimes without consequence, Chad put Voldemort's wand to good use and hit him with a Crucio curse. A couple more times and the man was almost eager to comply to anything Chad wanted, let alone feedback on a helmet capable of magically transmitting an image. Unfortunately, human testing came with certain risks. 4 test muggles were blinded, one of them also suffering severe burns to his face, and the first poor bastard to test the helmet died. It was like his head had been microwaved, the filters designed to limit harmful light accidentally amplifying them. But 5 enemy muggles was a small price to pay for the end result. The headgear was now capable of remotely viewing through a solid faceplate, much like a blaster shield on a helmet from Star Wars. The image would also be sent to a remote device so Chad could watch what happens in the safety of his room in Hogwarts. Add a microphone and speaker to each helmet and Chad could now see and speak to the basilisk free from danger. Of course, just in case there was a chance of magic shenanigans petrifying him through the remote viewing setup, Chad had Snape make multiple Mandrake restorative drafts. With a finished product that could auto-filter harmful levels of light as well as other spectrums like ultraviolet and gamma rays, Chad was reasonably confident it should negate whatever caused the basilisk's gaze to kill. There was no direct line of sight, after all. But that was also what test subjects were for. When these men marched on Chadtopia to cause damage or harm, they would never have guessed it would lead to them facing down an extremely deadly magical snake. A couple nights later, when even those out patrolling the halls of Hogwarts were asleep, Peeves the Poltergeist was on a mission. He had been offered 10 dung bombs if he would chase Moaning Myrtle out of her toilet until morning. It was a strange request for a first-year Ravenclaw to make, but the mischief he could do with 10 dung bombs was well worth the effort of following along with whatever the boy had planned for the girls' bathroom. Peeves decided he would have to keep an eye on Terry Boot, and possibly blackmail the boy for more fun toys to play with. What both Peeves and Terry didn't know was that they were both used to gain uninterrupted access to the Chamber of Secrets. A few compulsions and Terry suddenly had the great idea to harass the crying ghost because she was so annoying. The kid was a bit of a D***CK, and Chad didn't need much effort to turn him into a willing patsy. How Voldemort got away with always opening the path down to Slytherin's lair with the voyeur of a ghost watching on, had made Chad curse the bastard for his plot armor. Was it because he was in a girl's body? Was that why Myrtle didn't care about the opening a secret door and an explanation for her death? She had been on Harry Potter straight away, like some kind of sexual predator. After one of his Hogwarts elves reported the amusing scene of Peeves in action flicking boogers at the crying girl as she fled in fear from her toilet, Chad gave the go-ahead for the operation to start. An elf teleported in two of the Muggle captives to the entrance of the Chamber of Secrets, one wearing a helmet, and the other, one of the victims from the testing phase. Both were under the Imperious Curse, courtesy of Voldemort's wand and memories, so there was no chance of them running in fear at the sight of a 20-meter-long serpent. It would also help in testing if you needed actual vision of the snake's eyes to be killed or not, since one man was completely blind and the other was seeing through magical means. Harry Potter had been just fine by closing his eyes after all, while Colin Creevey had been petrified by looking through a camera. Watching from the comfort of his room, Chad pushed the button on his remote viewing device to activate the speaker on the Muggle Explorer's helmet. "Open!" Chad commanded in Parseltongue, hoping he wouldn't need to be there in person for it to work. Luckily, it seemed to be enough to activate whatever mechanism started the transformation of the sink into revealing the hidden passageway. Without hesitation, the two unwilling participants in this exploratory mission jumped down the exposed hole. Magic making them obey without question. Unlike in canon, the two men did not land without injury like their wizard counterparts. The man equipped with the helmet sprained his wrist, while the blind guy broke his leg. Jumping blind down a hole with a 6-meter drop would do that to you, no matter how spongy the ground was. The pain the two magically enslaved Muggles felt was not enough to break the hold Chad had on their mind through the Imperious Curse though, and the two injured men soldiered on down the now revealed passageway. The noise of bone grinding on bone with each step the blind man took was slightly nauseating, the helmet-sensitive microphone capable of picking it up the most trivial of sound. But since Chad fully expected the man to die, there was no point worrying over it. Entering another door that needed a parcel mouth to open it, the pair of test Muggles soon came to an old, large piece of shed basilisk skin while they traveled through the corridor. Seeing this on his screen, Chad made the two men stop. Turning to his elves standing nearby waiting for orders, he asked if they were now capable of teleporting directly into the chamber. Before they were unable to find it even after being told where the entryway was. After zoning out for a few seconds, the elf replied with, "Yes, master. I can now sense the passageway under the toilet. What if I closed the entrance, would you still be able to apparate there?" Chad inquired, no point in leaving a huge, noticeable opening into the sewers if there was no need to. The elf gave him a look that showed confusion, so Chad could only sigh and order the little guy to teleport the helmeted Muggle back to the toilet. Close. When the entryway was fully closed, Chad asked over the speaker if the elf could still apparate back to where he retrieved the man from in the now closed-off passageway. "Yes, master." The elf replied with confidence. "Well, that is convenient. Maybe it is similar to being invited by a secret keeper of the Fidelius charm. Once a house elf entered the Chamber of Secrets, they remembered where it was." Chad thought to himself. Either way, he would not have to risk exposure by opening the ridiculously flashy entrance in the girls' toilet ever again. Whoever was involved with that idea was an idiot. Salazar Slytherin was long dead before modern plumbing was invented, so it could not have been him. Since Chad now had access to elf travel to the before unplottable chamber, he stopped messing around and transferred all of his test Muggles into the passageway where the shed snakeskin was. Even the dead one. Although Chad could only control 5 Muggles at a time with the Imperious Curse, he didn't need them all to act as he ordered. Their only job was to confuse the basilisk with the number of choices for its meal. 14 of the 20 men were wearing helmets and also sported large flowing capes with pendants hanging from their necks as they were placed standing into the chamber. Besides those under his control, the rest were immobilized when the elves deposited them in the cavern. The 5 men that were injured or killed from the testing process of the helmets were to be a peace offering to the basilisk. The last was a baseline test for the killing gaze. It must have been starving if it had to survive on nothing but rats down here in the sewers, especially after Riddle woke it up from its magical slumber. They were at the end of a long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars entwined with serpents rose to a ceiling lost in darkness, which must have involved some magic carry, seeing as the distance down the entrance pipe had only been 6 meters. There was an odd, greenish gloom that filled the place, making it easy to see the surroundings of the chamber. Even the statue of Slytherin, high as the chamber itself, loomed into view, standing against the back wall. According to the book, the statue's mouth would open, and the basilisk would emerge from it when called. Since the massive serpent was not already in the chamber, it filled Chad with confidence in his backup plan if the snake turned violent. With no basilisk there to disturb his plans, Chad had the elves place the men around the statue's feet, leaving enough room for the basilisk to make its entry. With the men in place and wearing their new magical accessories, still unable to move thanks to elf magic, Chad said the passphrase Tom Riddle used in the book. "Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four." Slytherin's gigantic statue's stone face was moving, and something was stirring inside its mouth, slithering up from whatever depths lay hidden behind the opening. Watching through his magical TV screen, Chad was thankful he was not there in person. What emerged was a poison green-colored monster, easily capable of swallowing down a full-grown man whole. The King of Serpents landed on the floor of the Chamber of Secrets with a meaty thud, coiling itself up ready to strike if needed. "Who dares summon me?" The serpent hissed, clearly unafraid of the 19 men and the corpse arrayed before it. The beast's presence, even when seen through the TV screen, was awe-inspiring. It took Chad a second or two to gather himself enough to address the basilisk's question. "Greetings, O mighty basilisk. I bring you an offering in the hope of establishing a friendship with Slytherin's most favored familiar," came Chad's hissing reply through the speaker on the first guy's helmet. He didn't want to antagonize the giant snake by having his voice sound out from 15 helmets at once. The giant yellow eyes of death locked onto the man with the sprained wrist, the source of Chad's voice. It seems the basilisk must have some control over its dojutsu, seeing as the man adjacent to the mouthpiece was stunned with his eyes opened and he still continued to breathe. If the baseline test guy was still alive, then it explained how Voldemort was able to interact with the beast. "You are a speaker. I do not detect any magic from you other than your clothing, let alone the mark of Slytherin's blood. How is it that a group of muggles dare to appear before me in Salazar's sanctum?" No matter how overpowered Chad became, he was still squishy and could be killed easily if attacked directly. This was why he was not standing in front of a 20-meter-long killing machine trying to make friends with it. Frankly, Canon Harry Potter was dumb as a bag of rocks for even thinking he would stand a chance against such a beast, especially when he could barely cast the first-year spells effectively. The fact that he relied on Ronald Weasley and Gilderoy Lockhart, both whom he knew were incompetent and one forced at one point, bespoke how utterly retarded the boy actually was. The Grim Reaper must have been on holidays when Harry Potter entered the Chamber of Secrets. It was the only explanation for why the idiot child was not killed in under 5 seconds. "These are merely my servants, I am not actually in your mighty presence and am speaking through the servant," Chad stated, not forgetting to give the snake a bit of an ego boost. "Are you so cowardly that you dare not even meet me in person? What need of friendship would I have with such a craven wizard? Tell me, why shouldn't I just rip and tear your servants apart to feast on their blood?" This serpent was starting to get a bit full of itself, and by its eagerness to be confrontational, its hunger was probably also getting the best of it. Riddle's memories of the basilisk were almost sickening in how subservient the great snake was in the few times he actually interacted with it. Had Slytherin done something to the beast so that it only served his descendants? It seemed very likely, but just in case it was only hunger making it aggressive, Chad decided to give it a chance. "Your power has been well documented. To fear your anger is a sign of respect, not cowardice. I didn't know if your hunger would demand my life or not and thought it prudent to send a delegation to serve as both a greeting and a gift," he said, as he moved the blind man with the broken leg forward to within striking distance of the serpent. It seems the basilisk had indeed been hungry, as it didn't even reply before striking at an unimaginable speed for a snake its size. When the massive head of the snake reared back after its strike, only a pair of feet were visible of the sacrifice. When Chad released his hold on the muggle's mind, they started to kick in panic before an audible gulp was heard and they too disappeared down its gullet. A second later and you could not tell a man had just been eaten alive. There was not even a visible bulge in the snake's stomach as the man traveled down it to be digested. Delicious. It has been many years since I feasted on a worthless muggle. Ah, I missed how they struggle so much after I swallow them whole. I am glad you approve of my offering. I can easily supply a steady source of food for you if we become friends. Friends? I may be trapped down here until Hogwarts is under attack and I am called, but that does not mean I am desperate enough to call a sissy wizard like you a friend, even if you are a speaker. Tell me, are you even of Salazar Slytherin's line, Tom's child perhaps? No, I am not. Is that an absolute deal-breaker to gain a partnership with you? I would supply muggles in exchange for some of your poison. Chad tried one last time. Though it seemed the basilisk was keen on becoming his enemy, there was only so many times he would put up with being called cowardly. Even Dumbledore was not game enough to enter the Chamber of Secrets. Instead, he sent his immortal bird to fight for him. Since Riddle was also as good as gone, with only 2 Horcruxes left, there was little chance that a direct descendant of Salazar would be waltzing down here to befriend the serpent. Ha ha ha, if you are not an heir, then you are nothing to me. You think I would actually supply you with my poison, are you an idiot? The basilisk ridiculed. I see, then that makes us enemies. Oh, I should mention that I killed Tom and ended Slytherin's line. That makes you about as useful as tits on a bull, you spineless worm. I shall enjoy the boots I make from your hide, every step a reminder of how pathetic you are, waiting down here for years like a little bee *tch. I will kill you. The basilisk hissed in a fury. Its eyes flashed, and everyone not wearing a helmet fell limply to the ground. It appears being blind was not a protection from death. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, so it must be like a legilimency attack, it assaults the soul through them. With a command to his elves, they released their hold over the restrained muggles, causing them to run fearfully in every direction. They had witnessed everything that happened since they were merely held in place, not unconscious. The 4 men remaining under Chad's control through the Imperious Curse had grouped together and retreated to see how the overgrown snake would react. Sure enough, when the beast saw its eyes were not effective against those remaining, it attacked in a rage. Swatting one poor unfortunate soul that was too close with its tail and sending him flying, it then lashed out and bit another. But as soon as it bit down across the man's body, since it did not intend to swallow the muggle down, it left itself open to retaliation, not from the man that had just *T himself in fear, but from the pendant and the cape that started to glow from being activated. Even as the potent venom of the snake started to kill the guy, his magical accessories did what they were designed to do. The pendant exploded, sending a powerful tranquilizer designed explicitly for reptiles into its mouth and covering its face. Chad had little hope of it actually anesthetizing the snake, but against a magically resistant creature, there was not a lot of options for subduing the beast alive. However, the tranquilizer was just an added extra, his primary focus had always been on the cape. Since the helmets protected his minions against the basilisk's killing gaze, its only 2 weapons left were crushing things under its weight or using its mouth to bite, poison, or eat people. As soon as the fangs punctured the cape, it expanded and attempted to wrap around the serpent's jaws. When Chad saw the first cape activate, he sent the 4 Imperious minions forward to join the fray. Without hesitation, they ran towards the rearing basilisk, and as soon as it slammed its head onto the ground to dislodge the now dead man strapped to its face, they piled on. As their cloaks activated and also wrapped entirely around the beast's head, it signed their death warrants. Even as the expanded magical clothing locked the basilisk's jaws together and covered its eyes, it also entrapped them. Even if the snake didn't pulp them against the ground in an effort to free itself, they would surely suffocate under the tightly enclosed magical cloaks. When their pendants also exploded with the potent tranquilizer, it was just another nail in their coffin. But Chad cared little for the fates of his disposable minions, they had been his enemies after all. Much better they die than his own loyal soldiers or elves. With the gigantic beast thrashing around blindly and without direction, it was time to send in the actual force that would subdue Slytherin's monster. Go! Chad ordered the waiting house elf ninjas. Whether they were guided by the elf that had already entered the Chamber of Secrets or just capable of following him, 30 ninja elves appeared around the thrashing snake. Pulling their personal expanded trunks from their belts, they immediately grew in size and spat out large, thick steel girders. Since magic would have little effect on its resistant hide, it was better to lock the beast down with other means. It would have been much easier to simply kill the basilisk, but Chad thought it a waste to destroy something that was over 1,000 years old. Especially when he was capable of healing the parts of the magical creature he would be harvesting materials from. A never-ending supply of basilisk skin would be extremely valuable. Under the overpowered abilities of house elves, the steel girders slammed onto the back of the snake and then molded around it into the semblance of the Omega symbol. Although the giant snake may have been capable of wiggling out of 1 or 2 of them, 30 or so locked it firmly in place. The basilisk was eventually forced flat on the chamber floor, forming a straight line. The girders were then positioned under its belly and were welded together, locking it in place. With nails hammered into its flesh and then welded to the beams, there was no escape. When it was utterly secured, the elves rounded up the fleeing muggles and dropped their stunned bodies nearby, no sense letting them run around free even if they had nowhere to go. With everything settled and no more chance of immediate death, Chad put on his personal anti-basilisk helmet. He still needed to remove the beast's eyes after all, and he wasn't going to trust the job to a controlled muggle or make elf-sized helmets. How the mighty have fallen. Chad taunted when he appeared next to the restrained basilisk. Coward, you arrive after the fighting is over, how pathetic. It managed to hiss, the anesthetic only half working. Are you an idiot? Why would I risk my life for no reason? Would you have met me if I was surrounded by roosters? Though the snake flinched at the mention of its only recorded weakness, it didn't seem too frightened by the concept. Fool, I am beyond such a weakness. Did you think Salazar would leave such a ridiculous way of killing Hogwarts' main guardian? The issue is still valid, why would you knowingly endanger yourself out of some sense of pride? Anyway, it doesn't matter, the winner is king and the loser the bandit. I'm sure the knowledge that I didn't fight you myself will be a comfort as you are harvested for ingredients and materials for the rest of your life. The basilisk stiffened at Chad's offhand remark of a lifetime of pain and misery. No, wait. The once prideful king of serpents begged, its lack of sight thanks to the dead bodies strapped to its head heightening the terror it suddenly felt. Though since it was a female, Chad supposed it was the queen of serpents. Alright, men. Hit it with stunners until it sleeps. He ordered the assembled elves, he wanted to see just how resistant it actually was. If the serpent's claims of roosters being ineffective were true, Slytherin must have boosted the deadly creature's other traits as well. Then again, who would leave a known weakness in a beast designed to kill your enemies? Chad suspected that a rooster insta-killing a basilisk was misinformation, much like Dumbledore's Phoenix song propaganda. It was probably along the lines of merely causing the beast pain since the snake was born from a fertilized chicken egg hatched under a toad. But that opened up other possibilities. What if another egg was used? Would the egg's donor become the new breed of basilisk's weakness? It warranted some testing, and now with a place to do it in Hogwarts and no other pressing concerns, he might as well devote some time to it. It took an impressive amount of red-colored jets of magic from the 30 assembled ninjas before the green beast finally lay still. After Chad had taunted it with a life of torture, its struggles had resumed, and each elf must have shot out at least 20 bolts of magic intending to knock it out. Deactivating the magical cloaks wrapped around the now comatose snake, the mangled bodies of the 4 men oozed onto the floor. Chad couldn't work out what killed them, suffocation, complications from overdosing on tranquilizers or being turned into hamburger meat from repeated bludgeoning. Either way, its large eyes were now free to be harvested. Straps of steel were then wrapped around its head to muzzle its poisonous maw and then bolted in place to prevent movement. This was to stop it from attacking if it was playing possum or keep it still if it woke up under surgery. Chad didn't want to damage those mystical eyes accidentally if the monster suddenly jerked awake in pain. Excellent work, boys. Now, hand me a scalpel. Time seemed to pass quickly at Hogwarts, and even though he was not learning anything from his classes, the books he gained from the Room of Requirement provided interesting insights and spells. Unfortunately, whether from design or simply there were none, Chad could find no personal journals of the Hogwarts founders among the piles of books his house elves had copied. Not even any of the headmaster's private musings. There was 1,000 years' worth of books that had been brought into the wards of the magical school, and Chad had ordered a completely new underground library to be constructed when they first started their copying operation. Thankfully, the Roar did not copy everything written down in Hogwarts as he would have had piles of school assignments to sift through for relevance, although this could also be why there was never any personal diaries or journals discovered. In the end, Chad had still discovered finished books on a few subjects written by the founders, but they were merely original course books for their students, nothing like grimoires holding powerful spells or knowledge. Still, as the months flew past, Chad enjoyed his time either reading, training his 2 minions or experimenting with his captive Phoenix and Basilisk. With no engineered deadly situations to worry about, Hogwarts was just a regular school, albeit a magical one. With Dumbledore gone, there was no constant spying or schemes to worry about, but Chad kept up a steady vigilance just in case the old coot popped out of nowhere. Dumbles was still in the wind after all. Snape was thoroughly under Chad's control and kept him up to date with his correspondence with Dumbledore, though it was rather one way. When he had inquired if it was possible to track the owl delivering the missives, Severus had informed Chad that Dumbledore had spells active to prevent that. The old man was nearly as paranoid as himself, and not even Snape, a man Dumbles considered his closest confidant, knew where he was or what his plans were. He was to simply keep an eye on Potter and report the goings-on in the castle. Pettigrew was no longer scurrying around Hogwarts ready to pop out and do Death Eater things, and with Sirius already out of Azkaban, there would be no breakout and Dementors at school. Though that line of thought had brought up more evidence of Dumbledore's manipulations. If Snape was his spy and informed him about the attack on the Potters, how did Dumbledore not know about Pettigrew? In many fanfictions that Chad had read in his previous life, if Dumbledore was not evil, he was simply oblivious to Sirius Black's innocence. There was no way he wouldn't quiz Snape on how Voldemort found out about the Potters' location or who was the traitor. And if Snape didn't know, then he was the worst spy ever known. Then there was Voldemort's whole inner circle that were aware of Wormtail the betrayer, and they would have certainly known of Black's innocence. The only other explanation was that Snape had been able to keep it a secret from Dumbledore somehow, and that just meant he was more of a douche than Chad first thought. Either way, the man was now under his command and would not be causing any problems. Other than the Horcrux diary, Chad had taken care of any problems other than the Goblet of Fire. And with Barty Jr. most likely dead or with Dumbledore, Chad didn't see how that was going to happen. Unless the old goat engineered something himself. But his name change should hopefully protect against any unexpected magical contracts. No, Chad was experiencing a peaceful school life with Dumbledore out of the picture, and until he made his return, Chad planned to take advantage of it. No sense continually worrying about something he could do nothing about without making things worse. That's what contingency plans were for. With Phoenix Tears and a live basilisk on hand to harvest, Chad had an unlimited supply of components to play with. Though the skin that grew back was not as powerful as the first harvest, it was still miles better than any other magically defensive material currently on the market. School holidays came and went with Chad choosing to spend them getting to know his dogfather better. The man-child was pretty fun to hang out with, even if Sirius did try a bit too hard. Thankfully, Sirius was not well versed on the animal kingdom and believed Chad when he said his new animal form was a blue swallow. How would he know any different? It was not like the notorious slacker was going to comb through books on birds to prove him wrong. This deflected a lot of potentially embarrassing situations from his Playboy guardian. Serious eyebrow wiggling and insinuations would have been unbearable. Australia, or now Chadtopia he supposed, was firmly under his control. With a steady stream of people still leaving, the population had fallen below 5 million nationwide. This was a good thing in Chad's books since fewer people would make it easier to handle any changes to the new management of the country. Though he still needed a new name for his country, Chadtopia was a bit on the nose. Maybe he should keep Australia as the country's name and make Chadtopia the name of his magical kingdom. Anyone that caused too much trouble had been detained and put to work under elf supervision. Others had just been forcefully placed on a plane out of the country to become someone else's problem. Those that had seen anything magical now enjoyed a lifetime of slavery. There had also been talk from his loyal house elves of a magical breeding program for wizards and muggles to increase their muggle-born workforce. The little buggers were ruthless in their need to streamline their master's kingdom and make it successful. Chad didn't want to just enslave the entire population of Muggle Australia, as that would be more trouble than it was worth. Much better to lower taxes, streamline government, and offer free land and housing to any that chose to remain. With his massive personal wealth, it wasn't like he needed the money the Australian taxes would generate, and pumping it back into the country would help appease any people still left with grievances over the forceful annexing of a continent. Still, the entire process had left him not wanting to do it again, and his subjugation teams moving through Africa had become even more cautious because of it. Thankfully, it had a large area with a sparse population, much like Australia. The Wagadu School of Magic had fewer students than Hogwarts, and the Ministry of Magic in Africa covered the entire continent. Each country didn't have its own separate magical government. With 20,000 wizards and witches spread out over the huge and mostly wild, untamed land, picking them off one by one was just a matter of time. Something that Chad had plenty of. It was still only 1992, after all, and surveillance cameras would not become widespread for years. After the brief upset that Harry Potter, Sirius Black and Albus Dumbledore caused Britain's Ministry of Magic, they quickly returned back to normal. It was almost like they purposely forgot it had happened and fell back into old routines. Chad could only shake his head and wonder at their willingness to forget anything that conflicted with their perfect worldview. Was this why canon Harry Potter kept being flip-flopped between a Dark Lord and a hero? He continued to upset the balance in their otherwise harmonious lives that were stuck in a time loop of technological and societal stagnancy. Whatever it was, it worked to Chad's advantage, as even without the changes he had made or Dumbledore to push things along, events still continue to play out the same as canon. That was evident when Dobby made an appearance. He had tried to interfere with Chad's mail, only to be brought down by his elves. Since he was aware of Dobby's plans, Chad had those guarding his mail inform Dobby that there was no need to prevent Harry Potter from going to Hogwarts. They already knew about the diary and would see it destroyed. In fact, they even had a plan to liberate him if he wished to join their group. A simple method of being invisible while Lucius was changing and catching the discarded clothes was explained to the fanatical house elf. He joined 1 month later. Arthur Weasley still started to conduct raids looking for dark artifacts at the start of his second year of Hogwarts, and Malfoy tried to sell off his Tuborgan and Burke's antique shop. Hell, even Lockhart was going to be the next defense against the dark arts teacher. When Lockhart had announced his new position at Hogwarts in the Daily Prophet, Chad had nearly done a spit take. The sheer ridiculousness of that man teaching anything other than the memory charm was unbelievable. He had no idea why McGonagall went along with it. Maybe Auror Blintley had spread the word on how he had been treated at Hogwarts or the joys of teaching children to his workmates. Blintley had, after all, just been a stand-in replacement that had been stuck in the position when no one else volunteered. Caught between no other candidates and a well-known public figure, maybe McGonagall had just given in. That or Dumbledore was still pulling her strings. Either way, Chad was now watching from across the street as Lucius Malfoy and Arthur Weasley scuffled like muggles in Flourish and Blots. Sirius was with him on this shopping trip and was confused why his godson wanted to go on this particular day. He had even made an offhand comment that Harry must revere Lockhart's adventure, for which he had received a rather viciously aimed stinging hex. Magical houses were rather convenient for their trace-nullifying abilities. Chad had timed their trip perfectly with the aid of house elf minions and had just arrived to see the fight between Lucius and Arthur. Since he was watching for it, he even managed to see Lucius slip the diary into Ginny's cauldron via her transfiguration book. "Are we not going to go over and say hello?" Sirius inquired after seeing the fight through the shop window, unsure why they were not getting in on the action of the two wizards feuding. He had nothing against the Arthur Weasley other than his love for Dumbles, but Malfoy would be fun to poke fun at. As entertaining as that would be, I am more concerned with Voldemort's Horcrux that Malfoy just gave to the little red-headed girl, Chad replied nonchalantly. "What? Do try not to make a scene, Sirius. We are here to retrieve it secretly after all." Since everyone's attention was on Lockhart's book signing or the two wizards fighting, Black's outburst remained mostly unnoticed. After the reminder to not draw attention, Sirius endured in silence while waiting for his godson to make a move. The boy is entirely too mature for his own good. Sirius thought to himself, resisting the urge to sulk at a missed opportunity to prank Malfoy. Instead of Draco insulting Potter to start the fight, like in canon, it seems Ron had taken Harry's place as the target. Finally, after a parting insult accompanied by a sneer of disdain, Lucius gathered up Draco, and the two of them left to continue shopping elsewhere or were off to invent new Weasley insults. After a quick request for Sirius to draw attention away from himself while he got the Horcrux, they walked across the street and entered the bookshop. Picking a few random books off the shelf, Chad then accidentally bumped into Ginny. Just like it did when Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Malfoy, it caused her cauldron to once more tumble over and spill her school supplies over the ground. Of course, Chad had also dropped his books in the process. "Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going. Here, let me help you," Chad kindly said, making sure to slip Riddle's diary into his own pile of books as he picked everything up. When Ginny saw the dashing and helpful stranger had a lightning bolt scar on his head, her face turned redder than her hair. After all, she was meeting her crush for the first time, and he was even helping her. A quick scan of her surface thoughts told Chad that Ginny did indeed have a crush and some childish hero worship towards him, but it had yet to turn into anything sinister like gold digging. Placing her books back into her cauldron, Chad once again gave his apologies as he made his escape. He had seen Gilderoy Lockhart making his way over and wanted nothing to do with the man. Thankfully, that was what Sirius was for. While Chad had been bumping into little girls to steal dark artifacts, he had been drawing everyone's attention with his boisterous behavior, nearly rivaling Lockhart's need to be the center of attention. Hiding behind one of the many bookshelves, Chad placed the books he had selected for his ruse back onto a random shelf and put Riddle's diary into a prepared moleskin pouch. While Sirius and Gilderoy battled for who could be the most ostentatious, Chad found an assistant to gather all of this year's books except for Lockhart's fantasy novels. The assistant raised his eyebrows when Chad paid and also placed his purchased books into the moleskin pouch, but what was he going to do? Asked to look inside. Accusing Harry Potter of stealing would see both House Black and Potter destroy his boss's store. But even if he did insist on seeing the contents of the magical bag of holding, a blank diary would not raise any questions. A signal to Sirius before quietly leaving the store and Chad was home free with the Horcrux secured. He could have just stunned Ginny at Hogwarts and taken it then, but better to get the diary before she even uses it. Who knows what compulsions or damage Voldemort's Horcrux could do to her 11-year-old mind. It could be half the reason for her sudden, forceful and independent behavior from the shy and blushing girl she was before the Chamber of Secrets incident. 10 minutes later and Sirius met him in the leaky cauldron where Chad had already booked a private room and was enjoying a butterbeer. He was amused to find his godfather was holding a pile of Lockhart's books. That man has some serious problems. I was drawing a crowd to distract attention away from you when Lockhart came over and somehow managed to surpass me in being outrageous. Me, Sirius Black, a marauder, outdone by some jumped-up author. He complained, so annoyed he didn't even make a name pun. Why did you buy his books then? Chad asked, stifling a laugh at the man's antics. I didn't. He somehow managed to turn the whole situation into personally signing them at my request and even forced me to take a picture for the Daily Prophet. Sirius groaned as he exaggeratedly flopped down into a chair. Chad muffled a laugh as he took pity on the man and summoned someone to order him a butterbeer. That was the beauty of private rooms, priority orders, and a means to summon a waitress or old Tom himself. After a waitress had supplied both of them with a butterbeer, Sirius settled down and asked the question that had been bothering him since he found out why they were in Diagon Alley in the first place on this specific day. So you got it then, Voldemort's Horcrux? Sirius asked, both excited and a little fearful. Chad just reached into his moleskin bag and tossed the diary to him. The casual way Chad had just chucked a dark artifact at him nearly made Sirius spill his butterbeer and caused him to fumble and drop the diary onto the floor. Merlin Harry, you can't just throw a Horcrux at a man. Relax, they are nearly indestructible, and this one will only affect you if you write in it. Besides, the look on your face was worth it. Chad replied, laughing at his aggrieved expression. Grumbling about brats and Potter jeans, Sirius gingerly picked the cursed book up and opened it to reveal its blank pages. It's empty. Yes, it will only write back if you dab some ink on it. Oh, I just thought of a great idea. Let's prank Voldemort. Chad said excitedly. Sirius' jaw nearly dropped to the floor at the idea of playing a prank on the Dark Lord that had struck fear into the wizarding world and killed his best friends. But then a malicious gleam flashed across his eyes, and he smirked. As a proud marauder, how could he not go down in history as the man who pranked old Snakeface? I'm in. What followed was an afternoon of butterbeer and angry replies from a 16-year-old Tom Riddle. Though Chad had warned Sirius not to leave his mind open to attack, it was a Horcrux after all. Chad had let Sirius in on how he had already made one Horcrux believe it was hundreds of years in the future and that Voldemort was worshipped as the god of muggles with an obsession for virginal boys. With that as a baseline and a proud tear leaking from the man's eye, Sirius requested a quill and ink from the waitress and set about ruining Hogwarts-age Voldemort's day. With his occlumency shields in place, Sirius wrote an emotional, Dear Diary, entry that would make even the most spoiled teenage girl green with envy at the drama inscribed onto the pages. My daddy didn't buy me this, my daddy didn't do that, mummy makes me eat vegetables, I would rather die than do chores. The sheer absurdity being written must have shocked Riddle into not instantly replying because Sirius had written a full page worthy of a daytime TV drama before he introduced himself. That or he was questioning if it was worth talking to this mouth-breather or waiting for someone else to write in his Horcrux diary. Either way, when he finally bit the bullet and replied to the ramblings of what appeared to be an emotional teenage girl, Riddle started off slowly by asking if she was okay and then assuring her that he was a real magical book when challenged. What's your name then? I can't call you Magic Book, that sounds lame. Wrote Sirius, enjoying playing the role of a bratty teenage girl. My name is Tom, came the neat and flowing handwritten reply after the ink was absorbed into the page. Say what you will about Voldemort, but the man had impeccable penmanship. Don't you have a surname? Gross, don't tell me you are a peasant, Daddy says I shouldn't talk to servants. My name is Tom Marvolo Riddle, it's written on the cover. Came Tom's indignant reply. What, like that Dark Lord from years ago, the one that fathered a troll army? I always wondered how you managed to sleep with all those female trolls, weren't they ugly and really, really big? What? I never slept with a troll, how dare you slander the name of Lord Voldemort? Lord Voldemort? I thought you said you were Tom Riddle the troll F***er. Why are you now claiming to be Dumbledore's sex slave? Sirius Black had always thought the world was not fair until this day. The 2 hours he spent trolling Lord Voldemort with his godson almost made up for the 10 years he spent being emotionally tortured by Dementors. Almost. When Tom Riddle finally refused to write back, Sirius wiped the tears of laughter from his eyes and gave the Horcrux to Harry. Even though he was worried about letting his godson play with such a dangerous dark artifact, the boy had already destroyed all of the other ones. It would be a bit hypocritical to now say it was too risky. It wasn't like he could really complain, seeing as the brat kept smugly reminding him that he was more mature than a guy that couldn't get Skeeter to owl him back after jokingly calling her his B***TCH. Even after explaining the joke to her about his animagus form, Rita was still giving him the cold shoulder. Merlin, Azkaban really killed my game. Sirius morosely thought to himself, at least Harry turned out alright, even with mother and creature raising him. Much better than Regulus and me anyway. Never in his wildest dreams would Chad have ever imagined saying this, but thank God for Gilderoy Lockhart. The man was just as ridiculous as he was in the books. If anything, they toned down his need to be the center of attention no matter what was happening. But things had started to become a bit boring, and Chad was just thankful he had the fool to dance around and say stupid things to break up the monotony. Was this why kings of old had jesters? Though Lockhart had tried precisely once to involve him in his quest for fame and glory, it hadn't ended well for him. Careful editing of the idiot's mind had seen him believing he had fallen down the stairs and would ignore Potter in fear of the boy stealing his spotlight. With the man pretending Chad didn't exist and not trying to badger him into interviews or book deals, he was extremely hilarious to watch as he inflicted himself on others. Even teachers weren't immune to his buffoonery. With Dark Lord Dumbledore waiting patiently for Voldemort to make a comeback so he could pop out and say, "I told you so," Chad had been left uninterrupted to finish all of his experiments and projects. But there was a catch. Phoenix Tears had been an overpowered fix to nearly every problem he had. Test thugs exploding from permanent full-body transfigurations or dying from their soul anchors being broken? Phoenix Tears. Damaged soul? Phoenix Tears. Healing of cursed wounds like werewolf claws? Phoenix Tears. Mental damage from the Cruciatus curse? Phoenix Tears. It was basically a miracle cure for anything and everything, and if one drop wasn't enough, 2 or 3 would get the job done. Quite frankly, it had ruined the excitement of experimentation for Chad since he knew that Phoenix Tears would just fix it easily. Was this why R.O.B hadn't given him any wishes to make him OP? Chad had thought it an exaggeration when he had read that it was capable of reviving a person from any injury and could save someone from the brink of death. Surely it must be wizarding over-exaggeration at work of how great magic is, like the Deathly Hallows. But no, it actually fixed damn near everything. It had made things incredibly dull, and Chad was having a bit of a sulk about it. Sure, all of his minions were now sporting Captain America bodies and cured of any disease known to man, but where was the fun in that? He wanted to enjoy his second life playing God with his overpowered magical abilities, but had already been outdone by a fiery chicken. Oh, the horror of boredom. Luckily, Lockhart was there for him to laugh at while he thought up new ways to keep himself entertained. He needed a reason to use his ridiculously expensive and kitted-out lab after all. Chad had first thought to breed a new species of basilisk, but after thinking about it, had decided to not do so. He was a person that was way too paranoid to have a minion capable of directly killing him by blinking its death eyes in his general direction. Even if it would be hilarious to see the face of his enemies after failing to use a rooster to kill his basilisk birth from an ostrich. Though his captured ingredient snake had entertained him with her magical body parts for a while, there was only so much you could do with protective armor and focused Medusa ray ordnance. Well, as much as you could call a basilisk eye in a tube with a magical battery to power it, ordnance. Things had become so boring, that Chad had his elves cleaning up any of Lockhart's more negligent escapades to stop him from being kicked out of Hogwarts. Just so he could continue laughing at how much he annoyed everyone else. But alas, everything must come to an end and the Dada curse had struck again. Not that there was a curse, he had checked. The original one cast by Voldemort was nowhere to be found, which made sense seeing as Dumbledore would not leave it active to cause him problems. Since the Chamber of Secrets drama didn't happen, there was no dueling club for Gilderoy to be beaten by Snape into some form of self-awareness and not to bite off more than he could chew. With Chad's elves also cleaning up any trouble Gilderoy may find himself in, he had become cockier. After the Pixie incident, Lockhart had focused on safer options for defense against the dark arts, like quizzes about himself or reenacting scenes from his Godawful book. This had caused Chad to start injecting harmless circumstances into the man's classes to keep himself entertained. But Chad had severely overestimated Gilderoy Lockhart's competence, even with an already extremely low opinion of it. When his elves informed him that Lockhart planned to introduce the class to a new creature, Chad couldn't help but laugh at his choice and then plan some mischief. It seems Gilderoy had gotten over the Cornish pixie incident but was still cautious. If only Lockhart actually practiced a spell before using it when needed, things would not have got so out of control. Though to be fair, no one could have foreseen what happened in the second-year Ravenclaw/Hufflepuff class 3 weeks before the end of the school year. Chad certainly hadn't, and he was the one responsible for it. The creature Professor Lockhart planned to introduce was called a puffskein, a small magical beast covered in soft fur and spherical in shape. It was a popular wizarding pet found worldwide since it didn't object to being cuddled or thrown about, perfect for children or clingy girls. It was an altogether harmless ball of fluff that was quite common in the wizarding world, and it spoke to Lockhart's teaching skills that he planned to introduce it into a class supposed to teach protection against curses and dangerous magical animals. Well, the Cornish pixies were also seen as harmless, yet they still managed to disarm the idiot, hang a Hufflepuff child on the chandelier and drive out a class full of second-year students. It had been amazing to watch and well worth the trouble of swapping their class schedule with the Slytherin/Gryffindor class. It would have been wasted on those kids. Although Neville should have been capable of defending himself now that Chad had given him courage and a few pointers on how to handle himself. Both him and Hermione were coming along nicely, and with Dumbledore not around to read minds, their loyalty had been adjusted accordingly even if it was already quite high. Chad could be called paranoid with all the protections against being betrayed, but that would be silly. In a world with mind magic, love potions and compulsions, it was almost certain they would end up betraying him at some point, even if it was not by choice. Best to be the one doing the enslaving than trusting people's integrity, honor, and goodwill, especially in a community that regularly betrayed an innocent boy they claimed to worship as a savior. No thanks. Chad would rather be slightly lonely from missing out on true friendship than take the chance to trust immature children to support or defend him, especially when they were capable of reality-bending feats. Ron had continually stabbed Canon Harry Potter in his back when it was turned after all, and they were supposedly best friends. When the final class of Gilderoy Lockhart's teaching career started, it was like any other. With a flourish of his well-tailored golden robes, the man strutted to the front of the room and flashed his trademark smile. Today, I am going to introduce you to a creature that most of you may already be familiar with. It is considered harmless by most, and for that reason, some of you may even keep one as a pet. But be warned, that is merely a deception shopkeepers employ to sell the fierce little beasts," said Lockhart as he did his grand reveal, ripping the covering from the cage on his desk. The exposed group of puffskeins were cutely bouncing around their enclosure without a care in the world. Their docile behavior putting a lie to Lockhart's earlier claim of danger. "It is my job to arm you against the foulest creatures known to wizardkind, for when a puffskein is sold, it is after they are thoroughly tamed with spells. Behold, look what happens when the spell is removed," cried Lockhart theatrically, waving his wand and casting the spell Chad swapped into his lesson plan. What had initially been a simple spell to cause the adorable little fluffballs to become angry had been switched with a bloodlust curse. And the effects were immediate. The 5 puffskeins that had been content to gently bounce around the cage were presently throwing themselves against the bars violently, doing their best to escape its confines. Now their only goal in life was to savage Gilderoy with their cute little bodies or lick him to death with their long tongues. Well, that had been what Chad expected to happen since everything he read on the creatures suggested they were incapable of inflicting any harm on even a muggle, let alone a wizard. Oh, how wrong he was. With a combined effort, the puffskeins managed to topple the cage off of the desk and smash it open once it hit the floor. Thankfully, it was a smug Professor Lockhart, holder of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, that they chose to go after seeing as he was closest. Like they were demon-possessed, the cute puffballs emitted a high-pitched shriek and launched at the now wary teacher, much to Chad's amusement. But that quickly changed when blood started to fly after Lockhart failed to defend himself or cast a shield spell. It turns out that their small teeth usually used to eat spiders were capable of biting off small chunks of flesh. Much like a swarm of piranhas in a feeding frenzy, it would have been death by 1,000 bites. Luckily for the incompetent Lockhart, there was only 5 of them, so there was little chance of death. Though to be fair once again to poor Professor Lockhart, not even Chad would expect a puffskein to react that way, even if the fraud manipulated them into anger. The problem came from the puffskeen's choice of target. The vicious little buggers had gone for the face. By the time Chad had snapped out of his shock at the prank gone wrong, the now blood-covered balls of fluff had ruined Gilderoy Lockhart's moneymaker. While the rest of the children were shrieking in horror and running from the room, Chad quickly cast a stunner at the downed teacher's head, catching them all in a single spell. Unfortunately, before he could mend the damage the rabid fluff monsters had done, a couple of the more stalwart students crowded around when they saw the situation under control. With an audience, there was no way Chad was going to show off his cosmetic spells for the world to see. The stupefying charm was already more attention than he wanted. How wizardkind had yet to develop a permanent beautification transfiguration spell when they could turn people into animals was beyond him. Usually, Dumbledore would sweep an incident like this under the rug and cart the unfortunate victim off to Poppy to fix up as best she could. However, McGonagall was mostly a straight shooter, and whether it was her kicking off Dumbledore's control or he had released it, she sent Lockhart off to St. Mungo's Hospital to be treated. An investigation was launched into the mishap that turned an adorable creature into a murder beast, and it was quickly found out that Lockhart intended to excite the class while also boosting his reputation for exposing hidden dangers in a harmless critter. With the man's office and room searched for information on what caused the incident, a few other embarrassing facts Lockhart might have wanted to be kept secret were exposed. Chief among them was him pilfering students for ideas for his new book. This alone was not a crime, but the memory charm cast afterwards was. Frankly, Chad was surprised the peacock of a man was not involved in some illegal underage sexual escapades. He had been astonished to find nothing untoward when he first investigated Lockhart. Chad was sure the man would be wiping away misdeeds involving young ladies. With only a few weeks to the end of an otherwise quiet school year, Chad had Snape volunteer himself to step in to teach the Dada class when it didn't conflict with potions. Any time it did, it would just end up as a self-study session with Filch checking in to make sure nothing unruly was going on. Unsupervised and bored children with wands was a dangerous combination. The Hogwarts students were used to this, however, as Lockhart didn't actually teach anything and they had to study to pass the end-of-year exams somehow. This made the 3 weeks that Snape taught boost his reputation immensely. Thanks to Chad's changes to his personality, the guy was able to properly convey his knowledge to his eager students. And Severus Snape knew a lot about the dark arts. All in all, it had been a good year for Chad. Quiet, productive, a little boring, but quite entertaining. He did feel a little bad for Lockhart though. The guy ended up looking like Mad-Eye Moody's face. Somehow, the Bloodlust curse had turned their bites into dark magic attacks, and the healers were unable to get rid of them completely. If only they had Phoenix tears. But at least it was better than losing all of his memories, right? Harry, Remus Lupin sent me an owl and wants to meet. What do you think I should do? Asked an uncertain Sirius. Chad could only sigh. It was only a matter of time before the cowardly lion, or werewolf, turned up to spy for Dumbledore. Best to deal with this directly and up front. Look, Sirius, he was your friend, and if you want to rekindle your friendship with him, I'm okay with that. But I want nothing to do with him. He found out that his friends were either killed or imprisoned and did nothing about it. Lupin didn't visit you to ask why you did it or get your side of the story. Didn't make sure his only friend's orphan child was cared for, didn't visit, send gifts or even make himself known until now. If you want to be friends with a man that was fine with thinking you were capable of betraying your brother in all but blood, willing to leave you to be tortured by dementors while he went off to live his own life without investigating anything, that's up to you. But I don't want that type of person in my life. Who knows what his motivations are or why he decided now is the best time to visit. He had 12 years to do so beforehand but seemed okay with leaving us to each of our fates. You knew him from before when you were friends, but I have never met him and don't intend to waste my time on someone so selfish. I wouldn't be surprised if he is on a mission for Dumbledore to spy on us. The fact that Sirius didn't try to interrupt his anti-Lupin tirades spoke of how he tentatively agreed, but he was a friend from the past, and that changes things. It was probably a bit mean to try and cut off the friendship Sirius seemed so desperate to fix, even after he made the decision to remove all ties with past relationships. To be honest, Chad thought Remus Lupin was a pathetic piece of sh*t and that he was thoroughly under Dumbledore's sway. He had never liked the man in the books, and even less so after actually living Harry Potter's life. He had seen what happened to Dudley, and that was without constant bullying from him and other children. It must have been way worse for Canon Harry with Dudley's full-time harassment. And why did Remus Lupin decide it was best to go off and mope for 13 years in the original timeline? Because for 3 days a month he turned into a werewolf. What a pathetic excuse. Apparently, it was fine to teach in a school full of children with the same affliction, but it was not okay to visit the child of your only friends. How could the guy justify abandoning Harry Potter and then take a job teaching and living with children at a boarding school? Dumbledore was why. The cowardly waste of space was firmly on Team Dumbledore because the old man had pulled some strings and allowed him to study at Hogwarts as a child. No other werewolf children ever got the same opportunity. That was apparently enough of a reason to never visit your only surviving friend to find out why he betrayed the Potters. Enough of a reason to leave Harry at the Dursleys even though he knew Lily and her sister had a falling out over magic, to never visit Harry to see if he was alright or send him a letter on his birthday. The sad part was that the man didn't even benefit from attending Hogwarts other than making a few friends that became family. Only to throw them away without the slightest bit of investigation as to why or how it happened. What was worse, even when Remus came back to teach in Harry's 3rd year, the man knew Harry was suffering at the Dursleys and still left him there. I guess living in a cave bemoaning your tragic life is better than helping out a defenseless child stuck in an abusive home. No, Chad despised Remus Lupin and wanted nothing to do with the man. How Tonks ended up banging the self-loathing coward was a mystery that could only be explained with magical interference. That or extremely poor taste in men. It was also another example of the man's hypocrisy. He was capable of going out with Tonks and getting her up the duff, but not able to care about Harry, the orphan child with no remaining family. He didn't even tell the kid about his heritage or stories about his parents. Chad had no idea why there were so many fanfictions that worshipped the man that was afraid of his own farts. Hell, some even made him and Sirius lovers. If that was the case, to believe the man you loved was capable of being a backstabbing mass murderer, and not worthy of a trial, spoke volumes about the man's character. This was also why Chad had introduced Rita Skeeter into Sirius Black's life. With a loving relationship, he wouldn't feel the need to disregard the callous actions of Lupin and once again become friends with the pathetic excuse of a man. Remus was simply undeserving of such an honor. Though Chad did have Skeeter put Sirius in the dog box occasionally to keep him from becoming too unbearable. The man had been strutting around the house, thinking he was God's gift to women when the sexy reporter agreed to be his girlfriend. The constant advice on how Harry could also achieve such results if he followed the old dog's hints and tips on how to be a ladies' man had simply become too much not to punish. A week without sex had seen the once proud man on his knees, begging for Rita to come back. Of course, there was no way she wouldn't. Chad had altered her mind into the perfect loyal and loving wife for Sirius, and the old dog was probably not too far away from proposing to her with how infatuated he was with her. Which honestly made Chad more satisfied than he thought he would be. He had come to really care for his godfather and wanted him to truly be happy. The man deserved it after his tragic life so far. He was also probably the only friend Chad had in this world that was genuine. Still, Chad could see his words had hurt Sirius, even if the man tried to hide it. Lupin was from the glory days as a marauder, Sirius Black's golden years and the happiest he had ever been in his troubled childhood. He was looking at Remus through rose-tinted glasses and Chad's unkind opinion of the man crushed his dreams of reliving the fond memories. With another sigh, Chad gave in to the kicked puppy look on his dogfather's face. Sirius, if you want to meet with him, go ahead, he was one of your best friends after all. Just be mindful of his motivations for only now seeking you out. Dumbledore is still in the wind, and I bet your absent friend is one of his bootlickers. Said Chad, once again sighing as Sirius' face regained its usual cocky grin. The man was not short on self-esteem after getting laid, that's for sure. Thanks, Harry, I know you had said it before how Remus failed both of us, but I'm sure he has a good reason. You will see, Remus was always the smartest of our group and wouldn't still follow that old bastard's lead, not now after his trial. Responded Sirius with a laugh, trying to already make excuses for the coward that had left him to rot. He knew differently but let Sirius have his moment of hope. It was best if he saw for himself how thoroughly under Dumbledore's banner the werewolf actually was. Chad still couldn't believe how obedient and thankful Remus was to Dumbledore, even with how terrible his life was. It was, after all, no better than any other werewolf living in magical Britain, perhaps even worse since he was thrust into dangerous circumstances and had all his friends killed off. Then again, magical compulsions were quite common and easy to use. Dumbledore was also not afraid to get his hands dirty to achieve his greater good or remove obstacles in his way. It would also explain away all the ridiculous choices those close to Dumbledore made, like Harry/Ginny, Hermione/Ron, Remus abandoning everything he loved then hooking up with Tonks, Tonks somehow finding Remus an attractive prospect for a husband, Sirius reluctantly living as a fugitive in the place he hated most other than Azkaban and letting Molly Weasley boss him around in it. The Potters giving away the Death Shroud when on the run from Voldemort. The Order of the Phoenix using non-lethal capture spells when continuously being killed off by Death Eaters. Letting Draco get away with terrorizing the school and eventually leading a Death Eater assault through the Vanishing Cabinet. Everyone being okay with Dumbledore's lack of political prowess with all of his titles and positions, and actually praising him for the fundamental Muggle-born rights that he passed into law. The list went on and on. Though Chad didn't really begrudge him the use of magically compelling people to follow his lead. After all, he did the same, even more thoroughly and on a larger scale. It was why he was so paranoid in the first place. Wizards and witches were a ticking time bomb that Chad wanted to negate before they went off. At the end of the day, morals and righteousness were all well and good until you either lost something you loved, got killed, or both. Ned Stark from Game of Thrones was the perfect example. He died with honor intact, but so did the rest of his family and the country under his protection. Even in modern society, might makes right, it was just mostly done more economically than through the use of violence. And with the easy access and availability to mind magic, not to mention its difficulty to detect, there was no way Chad wasn't going to use it. Especially when his enemies did. Which was why when Sirius returned a couple of hours later frustrated and angry at his last living friend, Chad was not surprised. There was simply no way Remus Lupin was not under Dumbledore's control, whether from emotional blackmail using his gratitude for attending Hogwarts or something more sinister and magical. Either way, Chad had always viewed him as an enemy, and the only thing that worried him was Sirius' hurt feelings. But this had long ago been accounted for, and when Rita Skeeter turned up to comfort his godfather, they didn't emerge from his room until the next morning, even when loud moans and furniture being destroyed echoed through the house. Had they not heard of the silencing charm? Chad had quickly cast it when the noise reached his room, that was on a completely different floor. He had no desire to listen to his godfather rail Rita Skeeter, no matter how hot she now was. And when they did finally emerge from their debauchery-infused seclusion, Sirius had a massive grin on his face when he announced they were engaged to be married. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.